Gazprom is a remarkable organization. It's one of the largest industrial corporations in the world. It's responsible for about 30% of Europe's gas supply, and it has the largest gas reserves in the world by far. The incredible reserves in the northern part of West Siberia, and very likely Gazprom will continue to explore and find more reserves along the entire shoreline of the Arctic Ocean. So Gazprom, you would think, is going to be with us for a long time. And yet Gazprom is under unprecedented pressure, both in the world economy and inside Russia itself. The world economy is awash in gas right now, the biggest single cause being the shale gas revolution in the United States. But more broadly, this is the golden age of gas, certainly in terms of volumes, if not necessarily in terms of value. And Gazprom is running into this in the form of more and more competition on world markets, and particularly from LNG, where Gazprom was a slow starter. Where the European market is concerned, the European market has completely changed the way it does business. And so consequently, the players are different, the market principles are different. Gas is no longer sold through oil-linked contracts. Instead, it's sold on spot markets and so forth. The effect of that is to put more and more of the risk of the gas business on the producer, which means on Gazprom. In addition to that, Gazprom faces a Europe that is more and more resistant to the idea of having a single supplier on which Europe is dependent. And consequently, when Gazprom talks about building new pipelines into the European market, there is a good deal of resistance from some of the members of the European Union and also from Brussels, from the European Commission. And then lastly, within Russia itself, Gazprom is gradually losing its monopoly. 30% of the domestic market is now in the hands of so-called independents who are competing strongly with Gazprom and will continue to do so. So Gazprom is losing market share within the domestic market. So if you add everything up, the lights are not going to go out on Gazprom anytime soon. But one has to take this into account when you consider such things as the leverage that Gazprom is able to bear in Europe and the security aspects of Russian gas supply to Europe. Well, there's a good deal of discussion about gas policy in Europe and what that implies for the risks of dependence, not simply on Russian gas, but dependence on suppliers outside at the perimeter of Europe, Norway, Algeria, LNG from the United States and from other sources. How does all that fit together? This comes at a very interesting moment, particularly if you focus on Germany. The Germans have pioneered the use of renewables to a greater extent than any other country in Europe. And being a pioneer has its risks because what the Germans have discovered is that there are unexpected side effects. If you privilege renewables, if you subsidize renewables, why, the effect of that is that you use less gas. If you privilege renewables, why, then you may find yourself with coal that is suddenly very cheap, and consequently your utilities may burn coal instead of gas, and once again your consumption of gas goes down. How exactly you make all these things fit and arrive at a coherent strategy for gas is very much a problem in Brussels and a problem in the various European capitals, first and foremost in Berlin, which is very much the place to watch if you're trying to follow this growing revolution, you could say, in European energy policy. It's fashionable to say that Brussels is at 6s and 7s in energy strategy. But be careful to observe that while there may be a lot of discussion and maybe even disarray on the level of policy, the actual situation where gas supply is concerned and gas distribution is concerned is much more reassuring. Europe has built an extraordinarily dense system to move gas from one end of Europe to the other. So I'll give you just one example. In 2009, when the Russians cut off the supply of gas to Europe in response to disagreements with the Ukrainians, the newspapers, of course, were full about how there were people freezing in the dark, the Bulgarians freezing in the dark. Some of them were. But in actual fact, the real lesson from the cutoff was how well Europe survived the whole experience. Because there's storage, because there are pipelines moving in every direction, there are swaps. So as you think about European energy policy, just remember this distinction between the policy, which is currently under debate in very moving times, and the reality of a system which is quite secure and quite efficient in moving energy, and particularly gas, across the face of Europe. Well, there's a lot of debate in particular about the latest plan by the Russians to build a pipeline that will run directly from St. Petersburg in Russia under the surface of the Baltic to Greifswald in Germany, in northern Germany. Now, the first thing to say about Nord Stream 2 is that there's a Nord Stream 1, which is already up and running and has been running since, I believe, 2011. Nord Stream 1 follows the same path. Nord Stream 1 starts from St. Petersburg, ends up at Greifswald. So what's the fuss about? Well, the fuss is, first of all, that Nord Stream 2 would double the capacity of gas that could be brought directly from Russia. But the fuss in particular is over the fact that if you build Nord Stream 2, the Ukrainian transit corridor is virtually knocked out. And this is indeed one of the objectives of the Russian gas strategists, because there has been so much difficulty in the relationship between Ukraine and Russia in gas matters that the Russians 20 years ago embarked on a policy of systematically bypassing Ukraine by building a series of pipelines running around Ukraine. So the first went across the Black Sea, on the bottom of the Black Sea actually, to Turkey. The second goes from Russia into Poland and from there into Germany. The third is Nord Stream 1, then Nord Stream 2. So how should one think about this? Is this a danger? Is this something that's good? On the good side, anything that diversifies Europe's supply of gas through all of these pipelines, plus the North Sea pipelines from Norway, plus LNG from Algeria, some gas that's coming from elsewhere in North Africa, all of that is to the good. The more diversified the channels of access for gas to Europe, the safer Europe is, and in fact, the cheaper gas is. On the other hand, what is bad about this is that Ukraine in particular will suffer. We are committed to protecting the interests of Ukraine, and Ukraine earns on average $2 billion a year from the transit of Russian gas through Ukraine to European markets. The Ukrainian route, incidentally, happens to be the cheapest way to get Russian gas to places like Italy, so the Italians are very much interested in maintaining the Ukrainian transit. Nord Stream 2, on the other hand, has a good economic case for it because it is the cheapest way to bring gas from the northern part of Russia to northern Germany. And northern Germany does need more gas because the traditional source in Holland is now being cut back because of earthquakes in Holland. So you can cite arguments on both sides for Nord Stream 2. Our view, my view, is that ultimately the case is strong enough that Nord Stream will end up being built. But there's no question about it. We have to find a way to safeguard the interests of the Ukrainians before we can safely approve Nord Stream 2 to go forward.